This video will be on soil fertility. Alright, this video will be on soil fertility. And one of the most important things about soil fertility is the soil pH. And our definition of pH, you might remember from our other video, is the degree of soil acidity or alkalinity. A little more specifically, it's the measure of hydrogen ion concentration within a solution. And this is also the negative log of the hydrogen ion concentration. So that's what our pH number, our pH value is then. So as hydrogen ion concentration increases, the pH number decreases. 1 unit of change in a pH value equals a 10-fold change in the concentration of hydrogen ions. So it's a logarithmic scale, which is important because a change of 2 pH units would be a 100-fold change in the concentration of ions. And pH is often called the master soil variable. Why, you might ask? That's because it affects a wide range of soil chemical and biological properties such as nutrient and toxin availability, soil microbial communities and their activity, and plant species' ability to grow on a site. Again, the soil pH is affected by the balance of hydrogen and hydroxide. These are inversely related, which means that as our hydrogen ion increases, moving to the left, our hydroxide ion concentration decreases. And if we have a pH, or if we have a hydrogen ion concentration of -7, what is our pH? So -7, we have a pH of 7. But then if we go to a concentration of 10 to the -8th, we have a pH of 6, so inversely related. The acidification is a natural process that's involved in soil formation and is greatest in humid regions such as tropical rainforests. And if you watch the video on soil orders, you might be trying to think which soil order that is now. So here we're talking about our altisols. These formed in humid areas are acidic and often have clay accumulations and are about 8% of the planet's surface. So the acidification processes, so carbonic acid is formed by organic matter decomposition. So we have CO2 plus water creating this carbonic acid, which then can decompose plant material. And there's also microbial acids as a result of decomposition. So organic matter accumulation, OM accumulation, helps to leach base cations, which are a source of hydrogen ions. Acidification processes continued, so oxidation reactions, so nitrification and sulfur reactions. Precipitation, so natural rainwater may have a pH of around 5.6. That can vary somewhat, but it's usually acidic, slightly, hopefully. And then plant uptake of cations. Remember, why plants might be uptaking cations is because they are essential elements in a lot of cases. So nutrients, potassium, ammonium, calcium. And so if we're in an agricultural setting or in a forestry setting, plants are taking that up and then we are removing that plant from the site, and with that we are removing those cations from the nutrient cycling. So bases can be removed by crops and trees or by leaching. So whether that's whether the bases are removed from removing crop material or by leaching, it's down through the soil profile, and also acidic parent material. So this chart shows the influence of ammonium nitrate being applied annually for 5 years at 6 different rates. And we can see that at the end of 5 years, we have a drop of 0.4 pH units just as a result of the fertilizer being applied. And then the amount of calcium carbonate or lime that would be needed to replace the base cations as a result of crop removal. So different crops can affect the amount of base cations that are removed. So this is why it's important to have good crop rotation and also be adding into a lot of our agricultural soils these inputs. The active acidity, so this is the amount of free hydrogen ions in the soil solution. This is what we usually measure when we measure the pH using a soil and water method, and it's actually a very small part of the total acidity. So it would take less than a third pound per acre of limestone to neutralize most active acidity. However, there's the reserve acidity, which is the soil's ability to buffer a change in pH, and this accounts for the majority of the acidity in a soil, and is what limestone must really try to neutralize in acidic soils in order to increase the soil pH. Soils with a large CEC or cation exchange capacity can hold large amounts of soil acidity, and these soils are often highly buffered, which means that it takes a large amount of lime to increase the soil pH. Soils with a low CEC are lower in their buffering capacity, and so it takes less lime to alter the soil pH. So alkaline soils are soils with a pH of greater than 7, and cation exchange capacity is saturated with base cations, and so pH is often controlled by dissolved carbon dioxide chemistry, solid carbonates, so our soil's parent material, and then exchangeable elements in the soil as well. Calcareous soils containing sufficient calcium carbonate to effervesce visibly when treated with cold, I think it's supposed to be an M, 1 molar hydrochloric acid, 0.1. And so this is a legal definition, sort of, a scientific definition of calcareous soils. When you hear calcareous soils, just think of soils with an abundance of calcium carbonate or lime. So soils that are highly buffered against changes in soil pH as a result from liming or acidification. How soils become calcareous? So enriched calcium carbonate parent materials such as glacial till. Also the deposition of carbonates in low-lying areas. So leaching, moving carbonates down through the soil profile or down across the landscape. Calcareous soils usually have a pH of 7.2 to 8.5, and the amounts of solid calcium carbonates can be 1 to 20% of calcium carbonate by weight. And then it's really the calcium carbonate that is controlling the soil pH in these situations. In calcareous soils, it is often not economical to try to lower the soil pH, as all of that calcium carbonate must be dissolved before we get a lasting impact on the soil pH. And if soil contains 1% lime in the top 7 inches, it requires 68 tons of concentrated sulfuric acid to neutralize. So that's why the acidification process on a calcareous soil just is not economical. Even though a lot of our urban soils have a higher pH, trying to change that pH through the entire soil profile is the wrong approach to management. So human influence on acidification. Again, we had that slide that showed the influence of nitrogen fertilization. So as these are oxidized, it produces strong inorganic acids, and this is tied to excessive use of nitrogen fertilization. And it promotes above ground biomass, which is then removed. So we have this acid formation as well as plant growth that is then removed. So it's kind of a double whammy on the acidification process. Liming is done to correct problems from excessive acidity. In some agricultural soils, the pH has been driven down to the 5s and 4s, and at that point we have aluminum toxicity that greatly inhibits plant root growth, and so there are efforts to combat this excessive acidity. And it also liming also improves physical condition, can stimulate microbial activity if we have these really acidic soils, and improves availability of essential nutrients or elements for plants. The frequency of liming varies on a lot of things listed here, so soil texture and sort of desired pH range would be two of our larger ones, the soil texture affecting our surface area and reactive area, but also the amount and quality of lime, so it's important to know what amendment you're putting down, and then calculating how much you might need. How does liming reduce soil acidity? The calcium and magnesium from the lime replaces two hydrogen ions on the cation exchange complex. These then combine with the hydroxyl ions to form water, and it's removed from the soil profile. The pH increases because the acidity source, the hydrogen ion, has been reduced and often removed from the site then. So again, liming requirements depend on soil pH and CEC, which help you determine the amount of reserve acidity, and liming applications are often influenced by the liming quality, so the particle size and calcium carbonate equivalent. This chart shows the effective particle size and the liming rate of a soil. So we have larger particles and down to our lower particles, and the finer the lime, the less is required to get a change in soil pH. Calcium carbonate equivalent, so the amount of material in limestone that is actively neutralizing acid, and then other material that doesn't contribute. So it's not pure in lime, so knowing that rate can influence your liming rate. Variability of sources, so soil pH variability within a field. So this is a 40-acre field that was sampled by a 16 by 16 grid. You see a pH range of less than 5.5 up to greater than 7 within the same 40 acres. So in an agricultural setting, this is why they often do scouting and don't just sample once for 40 acres. Knowing your sample unit size becomes really important. And then pH often changes with depth. And a lot of this would be related to our soil forming factors being most active at the top of our profile. And then as we move down, we start to get into some of our parent material that hasn't been affected by our soil forming factors. And then also seasonality and time. So there might be surface salts during a dry season, which these salts are then leached out during the wet season. Spring warm-up can also increase decomposition, so there might be a flush of acid formation at that time. And in an urban setting, something like ice melt salts can influence soil pH as well. So, conclusion on soil pH, no other characteristic is more important. Influences chemical environments and of plants and microbes. And accelerated acidification is second to only soil erosion as a global driver of soil degradation. And this is in an agricultural setting. So if you remember from our erosion talk, soil degradation can be linked to a collapse of societies historically, and so soil acidification is a really important topic to be understood and talked about when we talk about preserving our soil quality.